She was right there with Cindy, Naomi, Claudia, then gone. One of the most recognizable faces of the 90s, Niki Taylor had it all. Beauty, fame, covers stacked like a resume. But then, nothing. No scandal, no headlines, just silence. What happened to Niki Taylor, and how did one moment change everything? The girl who had it all. If you were flipping through magazines in the early 90s, you didn't just see Niki Taylor, you felt her. She had that kind of presence. The blonde hair, the athletic build, the megawatt smile that didn't feel forced. There was something so effortless about her beauty that it made her look both out of this world and like someone you could run into at the grocery store. Niki wasn't trying to look cool, she just was. She started young, really young. By 13, she was signed to a modeling agency, not in New York or LA, but in Florida. She didn't come from a fashion capital, she didn't have a famous family. What she had was a natural magnetism and a mother who saw potential early. And almost overnight, that small-town girl from Fort Lauderdale was flying to castings, juggling high school and high heels. And then came the first major moment. 17 magazine, not buried on a page somewhere, the cover at 14. Then, just a year later, it was Vogue. That's not normal. Most models dream of landing a single Vogue cover in their entire careers. Niki did it before she was old enough to drive. By 16, she wasn't just modeling, she was shaping beauty standards. The industry took one look at her and said, "Yep, this is the next big thing." And they weren't wrong. Niki was everywhere. CoverGirl snapped her up, making her the youngest face ever to sign a major cosmetics contract. She became the image of American beauty in the 1990s. Fresh, sporty, sunny. Not edgy, not mysterious, just that undeniable, clean-faced glow that brands could build campaigns around. And she wasn't a one-season wonder either. She had range. She could give you the high-fashion editorial with Steven Meisel, then turn around and shoot a wholesome commercial for Neutrogena or Maybelline. You'd see her on billboards in the JCPenney catalog, and then, bam, Versace runway. She fit everywhere, and that's what made her unstoppable. Then came the Niki 6. Ever heard of it? In May 1996, Niki Taylor did something only a handful of people in the entire industry have ever done. She appeared on the cover of 6 major American women's magazines. Simultaneously. Allure, Elle, Glamour, Self, Shape, and Vogue. At the same time. That moment cemented her. She was no longer just a model. She was a name. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing her face. But here's the strange part. Even with that level of fame, on par with Cindy, Naomi, and all the other supermodel legends, Niki Taylor was rarely mentioned in the same breath when the history books came out. Her name didn't carry quite the same weight. And it wasn't because she lacked the look, the talent, or the career. It was because something happened. Something that changed everything. But before we get to that, it's important to understand just how bright her star was. Niki wasn't just another pretty face in a sea of models. She was the future of fashion. The one magazines bet on. The one teenage girls cut out and taped to their bedroom mirrors. She made people feel like beauty was attainable, like fame didn't have to be messy. And then, she vanished. The day everything stopped. By the late 90s, Niki Taylor had what most people only fantasize about. Fame, fortune, a face that could stop traffic, and behind it all, she was still that grounded girl from Florida. Modest, kind, deeply private. She wasn't partying in the headlines or chasing controversy. She was focused on her career, her family, and quietly building a life away from the chaos. And then, everything stopped. It was April 29th, 2001. Niki had just left a charity event in Atlanta. She was sitting in the passenger seat of a friend's car when, in a split second, everything changed. The car crashed into a utility pole. It wasn't some high-speed, paparazzi-fueled wreck. No drama, just one wrong turn. And the impact? Devastating. Most people didn't even hear about it at first. The news trickled in slowly. Just a headline, a blip. But behind the scenes, Niki Taylor was fighting for her life. The crash ruptured her liver and nearly severed her spine. She was placed in a medically induced coma. Her family was told to prepare for the worst. And even if she did survive, doctors warned she might never walk again. She went through more than 50 surgeries, months in the hospital, years of rehab, the kind of recovery that doesn't make magazine covers. And while the fashion world kept spinning, she disappeared from it entirely. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. She didn't fade away with age or irrelevance. She was ripped from her life. At the height of her career, Niki Taylor was forced into total silence, while her peers booked more campaigns, opened fashion weeks, and transitioned into mogul status. She was learning how to sit up again, how to breathe without pain, how to be alive. And the industry? It moved on. There were no tribute editorials, no calls to check in, no brands waiting with open arms. Just silence. And in that silence, a once-in-a-generation supermodel was forgotten. Rebuilding in the shadows. You'd think that kind of survival would be headline news, right? That coming back from 50 surgeries and a near-death experience would earn you a comeback story, maybe even a little celebration. But that's not what happened. Once the tabloid moment passed, the crash, the coma, the brief updates, Niki Taylor's name just drifted away. The fashion industry, the one she helped define for an entire generation, didn't wait. It rarely does. There's always someone younger, newer, more of the moment. And Niki, she didn't chase it. While other models were rebranding themselves into business empires, launching skincare lines, or hosting reality shows, Niki was in physical therapy, learning how to walk, trying to manage the pain, trying to figure out what it meant to be her now, without the career, without the cameras, without the constant validation. And here's the thing no one talks about. She never made a dramatic public exit. No statement, no goodbye tour, no final runway moment. She just wasn't there anymore. And for someone who had once been everywhere, that silence was almost louder than any headline. But Niki didn't stop living. She just started living differently. She focused on her two sons, twins who had been born just a few years earlier. She started leaning into family, privacy, and healing. Because for the first time since she was a teenager, she didn't have to be on. She didn't have to smile for the lens or fit into a sample size or prove that she was still relevant. And honestly, that might have saved her, but there's something haunting about it too. Because this wasn't a story of fading fame or aging out of the industry. This was a woman who had everything taken from her in a single moment, and the world barely noticed. She wasn't trending, she wasn't scandalous. She stepped out of the spotlight and almost no one noticed. It's the kind of disappearance that doesn't come with closure. Because Niki didn't fall from grace. She wasn't canceled, she didn't spiral, she simply survived something most people never recover from, and then got on with life, while everyone else moved on. And years later, when the fashion world finally started romanticizing the supermodel era again, Niki's name was still missing from the list, trying to return to a world that moved on. Eventually, Niki Taylor did come back. Kind of. Not with a dramatic runway moment or a big magazine exclusive, but slowly, quietly, piece by piece. In the mid-2000s, she made a few TV appearances, daytime interviews, charity features, a return to the red carpet here and there. She even competed on The Celebrity Apprentice in 2011, showing a different side of herself. Smart, focused, business-minded. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She wasn't playing the supermodel card. She was trying to start over. And then there was True Beauty, a reality show she co-hosted with Vanessa Manillo and produced by Tyra Banks. It was supposed to be part modeling, part moral test, judging people not just by their looks, but by their character. It didn't last long, but the message, that part felt personal. Like Niki was trying to say, hey, I've been through it. I know what matters now. She even walked a few runways again. Not many, but enough to raise eyebrows, enough to get a few nostalgic headlines like, "Remember Niki Taylor?" But here's the catch. The world didn't really know where to place her anymore. She wasn't part of the original supermodel nostalgia tour that brought back Cindy, Naomi, and Christy. She didn't have a high-powered fashion comeback moment like Linda Evangelista or a billion-dollar brand like Tyra. She was somewhere in between, too iconic to be forgotten, but too absent to be fully remembered. And maybe that's what made her story so hard to headline, because she wasn't trying to reclaim the spotlight. She was just living in it on her own terms. No filters, no reinvention, no trying to keep up with Gen Z beauty standards. But in a media world addicted to extremes, scandal or success, downfall or reinvention, there wasn't room for a narrative like Niki's. A woman who survived a near-fatal accident, rebuilt her life, and still looked stunning, but didn't care about fame anymore. That's not clickbait. That's reality. And in that quiet space, Niki Taylor redefined what resilience actually looks like. And hey, if you've made it this far, you're probably just as into stories that actually mean something as we are. So, if you're into fashion history, untold lives, and everything in between, hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and we've got plenty more where this came from. All right, back to Niki. The legacy we almost missed. When people talk about the supermodel era, certain names come up like clockwork. Cindy, Naomi, Kate, Claudia. And they should. They earned their spots. But Niki Taylor, she was right there. She just didn't stay in the room long enough for the applause. But maybe that's the point. Because when you step back, her story isn't just about modeling. It's about what happens after. After the covers, after the fame, after the crash. It's about a woman who didn't chase reinvention. She chose restoration. She chose family. She chose to heal, not in public, not for attention, but for herself. And in a world obsessed with transformation arcs, where every comeback has to be flashy, viral, brand-ready, Niki Taylor gave us something way rarer: quiet resilience. She never wrote a tell-all. She never ranted about the industry. She didn't try to claw her way back onto the runway just to prove a point. Instead, she raised her kids. She showed up for causes that mattered to her. She built a life in Tennessee, far from the lights, with a husband who wasn't famous but made her feel safe. She did interviews again, eventually. Always with grace, always measured. And slowly, people started to remember, wait, Niki Taylor was incredible. She was the face of the 90s. She defined beauty for an entire generation. And then she survived what most people couldn't and came out stronger, even if the world didn't see it. Now, with social media reshaping the narrative, younger audiences are discovering her for the first time. Not as a tragedy, not as a tabloid, but as someone who really lived through something and never made a spectacle of it. And maybe that's the real legacy, because not every story needs a perfect ending. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep going when no one's watching, to still be here without apology, without pretense. Niki Taylor didn't vanish. She endured, and in the end, that's worth more than any comeback headline. The unseen pressure to be perfect, before the crash, before the coma, before the years of silence, there was already something quietly brutal about Niki Taylor's career. She might have looked like the picture of ease, but behind that clean, sunlit image was a young girl trying to meet a standard that barely even existed. Because here's the thing. In the 90s, the modeling industry didn't just reward perfection, it demanded it. You had to be the right height, the right weight, have the right kind of beauty, and never show any cracks. And Niki, she ticked every box, but still, the pressure was relentless. She was working non-stop while still technically a kid, shooting campaigns, flying internationally, doing press, all while her classmates were going to prom. She never had the luxury of being a normal teenager, and unlike some of her peers who leaned into the edge or the controversy, Niki's image had to be spotless. That was the brand. Healthy, natural, nice, always nice. But you know what that means? You don't get to mess up, you don't get to not smile, you don't get to be complicated. And that kind of perfection, it's a cage. Even when she was burning out, she didn't make headlines for being difficult or diva-ish or off the rails. She just quietly kept going. Because when your whole career is built on being effortless, there's no space to ask for help. That facade of ease can be isolating. And on top of all that, she carried a pain that few people knew about. In 1995, just a year before her historic Niki 6 magazine run, her younger sister Chrissy, who was also a rising model, died suddenly of a rare heart condition at just 17. It shattered her. But in typical fashion industry style, the show went on. There was no real pause, no moment to process, just more jobs, more cameras, more smiling. That grief never made it to the runway. Can you imagine the emotional weight of that? Losing your sister, your best friend, your anchor, and still having to show up on set the next week looking radiant? That's the part people don't see when they scroll through those glossy covers. It's not just about beauty, it's about endurance, about wearing the pressure like it's part of the wardrobe. And maybe that's why Niki's story hits different. Because even before the crash, before she vanished, she had already paid a price that no one really noticed. And maybe she didn't push back because she didn't know how, or maybe because at that time no one was really listening. It wasn't like now, where models speak out about mental health or burnout or impossible standards. Back then, you just smiled through it, especially if your entire brand was being the sweet one. But make no mistake, Niki Taylor was never fragile. She just had unspoken courage. And maybe, just maybe, that's why when everything finally did fall apart, she didn't. Not really. She went quiet, not broken, just rebuilding out of frame. Where is she now? So, where did Niki Taylor end up? Not at the front row of Paris Fashion Week, not headlining a major brand, not launching a billion-dollar beauty line. But that doesn't mean she disappeared. She just shifted. Today, Niki lives in Nashville, Tennessee, far from the fashion capitals that once shaped her every move. And honestly, she seems more herself there than she ever did in the spotlight. She's married to Bernie Lamar, a NASCAR driver, and together they have 2 children. Add in the twin sons from her previous relationship, and she's now a mom of 4. A full house, a full life. She still models, sometimes. Not constantly, not like before. But when she does step in front of a camera now, it's different. You can feel it. It's not about staying relevant or proving something. It's about doing it because she wants to, because she can. And that shift, it's powerful. You might have seen her recently and not even realized it, appearing in campaigns for brands like CoverGirl again, in updated, mature versions of the ads she once defined. It's poetic, really. The same brand that catapulted her to fame inviting her back, not as a teenager with flawless skin, but as a woman who's lived. And that, maybe more than anything, is the legacy. Not the covers, not the Niki 6, not even the comeback, but the quiet, steady decision to keep showing up, even without the spotlight. She's not the loudest voice in the room. She doesn't need to be. Her story stands on its own. In a culture obsessed with second acts, she never forced one. She let her life speak for itself. Pain and all, beauty and all. And slowly, people are starting to remember. They're remembering the girl who ruled the 90s without a scandal, who modeled resilience long before it became a hashtag, who didn't burn out, lash out, or sell out, but simply endured something most people couldn't even imagine. Niki Taylor was never just a pretty face. She was, and still is, one of the greats. Not because she came back louder, but because she came back realer. And honestly, that's the kind of comeback story that sticks with you. Niki Taylor didn't return for applause. She didn't step back into the frame for headlines or nostalgia points. She came back quietly, with grace, with strength, and with the kind of truth most people never get the chance to show. She didn't need to prove she still had it. She needed to prove to herself that she was still here. And maybe that's the real power of her story. Not that she vanished, but that she never stopped existing. Not that she broke, but that she held everything together when no one was watching. So if you remember Niki Taylor, good. And if you don't, now you do. Thanks for watching. And hey, If stories like this matter to you, the ones that dig a little deeper, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more untold legends on the way.